Good morning, everyone.
Good morning, ma'am.
So we'll start with abnormalities of puerperium today. So what is normal puerperium? It is defined as the period following childbirth during which the body tissues, especially the pelvic organs, revert back to the pre-pregnant state. It usually lasts for approximately 6 weeks. So the period following childbirth, the first 6 weeks following childbirth is known as puerperium. So we'll discuss today about the abnormalities that can occur during puerperium. The most common is the puerperal pyrexia and the most important ones. Now you have to know the definition of puerperal pyrexia because not only in your theory but in long cases, because we sometimes don't have OBS cases, so many students may get puerperium as the long case. In that case, they are asked the definition of puerperal pyrexia. See, puerperal pyrexia is defined as a rise of temperature reaching 100.4 degree Fahrenheit or 38 degree centigrade or more on two occasions. It should be on two occasions at least at 24 hours apart. So it should be on two occasions 24 hours apart, excluding the first 24 hours. So after the first day, so from the second day onwards, if there are two episodes of fever of 100.4 degree Fahrenheit or 38 degrees centigrade, 24 hours apart, but within the first 10 days of puerperium, that is termed as puerperal pyrexia. Come under puerperal pyrexia. So this is the typical period, that is 24 hours after until 10 days of delivery. That is, in this period, if there are two occasions of fever, we call it as pyrexia should be considered until proved otherwise. So there could be other causes of fever during that period also, which could be urinary tract infection, which could be breast infection in the form of muscular infection or an episotomy infection. It may be pulmonary infections in the form of atelectasis or something else, a lower respiratory tract infection, septic pelvic thrombophlebitis, or it can be a recrudescence of malaria or pulmonary tuberculosis or some other causes. There could be a long list of causes of fever during this period. But the most important is puerperal sepsis. So any case of fever should be regarded as sepsis unless proved otherwise. So what is this puerperal sepsis? It is an infection of the genital tract, but only, which occurs as a complication of delivery. So it may be localized to the genital tract or it may spread to other organs also. So it begins with an infection of the genital tract. So what are the risk factors for puerperal sepsis? First thing I would like to say, these organisms causing the genital tract infection are usually normally present in the genital tract, in the vagina, the cervix, but they usually do not cause infection. Some other factors must be present for them, those same organisms to cause infection. There are some antepartum risk factors and intrapartum risk factors. So antepartum, if the mother is already malnourished, is anemic, she has higher chances of developing puerperal sepsis infection. If the mother is going into preterm labor or premature rupture of membrane or prolonged rupture of membrane more than 18 hours. So in those cases, there is increased chances of sepsis again. Now, if the mother is again immunocompromised or she is suffering from diabetes, any other immunocompromised condition also could lead to puerperal sepsis. So she has to have a condition which predisposes her to infection. It could be anemia, malnutrition, preterm labor, and prolonged rupture of membranes. These are the antepartum risk factors for puerperal sepsis. And intrapartum, when she is already in labor or during delivery. Caesarean delivery per se itself increases the chances of puerperal sepsis. And more so if it is an emergency cesarean section as compared to an elective cesarean section. Another thing is repeated vaginal examination. So we are introducing the infection inside the uterine cavity or into the vagina. So repeated vaginal examination especially if it's done without taking proper aseptic or antiseptic precautions. So, repeated vaginal examination should be avoided. Prolonged rupture of membranes again. Prolonged and obstructed labor. If the labor is prolonged and obstructed, it could lead to porphyrial sepsis. Majority of the sepsis patients that we get here are related to obstructed labor. Either the patient came here with obstructed labor somewhere, trial was given outside and then sent. Then intraoperative vaginal delivery, that is instrumental vaginal delivery, also increases the risk. Intrauterine manipulations like manual removal of placenta when we are delivering the second twin which is breech, we are manipulating. In those cases, like internal podalic version, breech extraction, we are inserting our hand into the uterine cavity. In those cases, when we are manipulating inside the uterus, we are most likely introducing infection within. So the chances of sepsis goes on increasing, and also in cases of postpartum hemorrhage. Now, what are the organisms responsible? It could be the aerobic organisms like group A beta hemolytic streptococcus, group B beta hemolytic streptococcus, methicillin resistant staphylococcus aureus, streptococcus pyogenes. All these organisms normally, this group B beta hemolytic streptococcus, streptococcus aureus, then E. coli, Klebsiella, even chlamydia, they could be normally present also in the genital tract. But they normally do not cause infection. Only when the host immunity is decreased or some other factors, predisposing factors are there, they cause infection. Similarly, in cases of anaerobic circulation, this is rarely present. Clostridia is also very uncommonly present. So these are the other organisms which causes infection only when the host immunity is decreased or when they are introduced from outside. Now, clinical features. Now, these organisms are normally present in the vagina and the cervix, and then it can cause an infection of the genital. Their normal presence may not cause infection, but sometimes because of decreased immunity, they can cause infection, okay, or the disease. Now, another thing is that how does it cause infection? It could be from the vagina, or sometimes the streptococcus could be present in the throat, and then it spreads to the it spreads by lymphatics or the bloodstream to the genital organs. Sometimes organisms like E. coli or enterococcus from the bowel can reach the genital tract. Sometimes skin infections like Staphylococcus albus from the skin can go and reach the genital tract. Those cases are known as autogenous. Autogenous transmission. Rather is the endogenous, that the vagina and the cervix, the organism was present in the vagina and the cervix and causes an infection of the genital tract. Sometimes it could be exogenous from the healthcare staff also. Okay. So these are the ways how it reaches the genital tract. Now, once it reaches the genital tract, what it can cause? It can cause infection of the wound, of the cesarean section wound, infection of the episiotomy wound. Sometimes this infection may enter even into the uterus, causing endomyometritis. Endometritis, then it can spread outside the uterus to cause parametritis. It can even spread to the pelvic peritoneum, causing pelvic peritonitis. Then it can cause generalized peritonitis also. It can cause pelvic abscess also, or at times it can spread to cause the ovarian abscess, or it can sometimes cause toxic shock syndrome also by Staphylococcus aureus because of the toxins released by the organism. And the clinical feature will depend upon whether the infection is localized or it is generalized, that it has spread. So depending upon the location of infection, the clinical features will be. Like if it is just localized to the wound will become red, swollen with pus, whether it is an episiotomy wound or cesarean section wound, where the patient will have fever with chills, rigor. If it is spread to the uterus, if it is localized to the uterus, the patient will have a sub-involuted uterus. The uterus will not be, involution must not have occurred to the uterus in the normal course, what should have happened. There could be abdominal pain, local discharge, fever, tachycardia could be present. Now, if it has spread to the to cause a pelvic abscess, if there is pelvic abscess, the patient may complain of diarrhea. Okay, if it has caused generalized peritonitis, there could be generalized pain in the abdomen, nausea, vomiting, and abdominal pain, tenderness could be present. So, depending upon where the infection is, your clinical features will depend. So, how will you investigate such a patient? The history. Your history will include important histories of her antepartum and intrapartum risk factors, whether she had prolonged labor, whether she had prolonged rupture of membrane, obstructed labor, instrumental delivery, mode of delivery, everything has to be, the history of everything should be taken properly to rule out other causes of porphyria pyresia. Now, clinical examination. During our examination, as a routine, as a general, you do the general examination, you have to examine the breasts because mastitis may be a cause. You have to examine the legs because deep vein thrombosis may be a cause. You have to examine the other organs like the liver and spleen. And for abdominal examination, if you find something else, then for vaginal examination and for speculum examination is very, very important because in your for speculum examination, you may find abnormal lochial discharge could be present. The uterus may not have involuted properly, which may be evident by a per abdominal examination also. Then in the investigations, what are you going to do is the complete hemogram. Here the total counts may be raised. Then some inflammatory markers could be done like interleukin 6, procalcitonin, which are raised in cases of sepsis. Then blood, urea, electrolytes, then liver function test also needs to be done. Now, to know where the infection is and what the organism is and to treat and to select the appropriate antibiotics, we will have to take the high vaginal swab and an endocervical swab. Now, it could be an urinary tract infection also, so urine culture and analysis may be done. If you suspect that the infection has spread beyond the uterus into the other organs, so you have to take a blood culture also. And these cultures are taken to diagnose and treat according to the sensitivity of the antibiotic. Chest X-ray may have to be done to see if there is any associated lung lesion, if there is pneumonia, if there is some pleural effusion, whatever is there. So accordingly, chest X-ray may be required. And pelvic ultrasound is normally done to see if there are any retained products of conceptus left out, which might be a needles for the infection. Now, how do we treat this patient? First thing before treatment is the prevention of the condition. Yes, we know the risk factors like the malnutrition, anemia, then prolonged labor. So malnutrition, anemia needs to be corrected in the antepartum period. Then prolonged labor or prolonged rupture of the membrane. This can be avoided by maintaining a partograph and augmenting labor as and when required. Then when we are doing as we know that cesarean section itself is a risk factor. In those cases, in patients undergoing cesarean section, we can give antibiotics during the cesarean section, prophylactic antibiotics. And we know if there are some retained products, again, there could be porphyrial sepsis because of those retained products. What we can do when the placenta is delivered, we have to inspect it properly that no retained goods are left out. So these are the preventive measures. Now treatment, the general care includes the isolation of the patient, admission, bed rest, the adequate fluid, the hydration has to be maintained, the calorie intake has to be taken care of, correction of anemia by tablets, by iron injections, or even blood transfusion may be required. A catheter may be given to relieve any urinary retention if present. And also for input-output charting. And then we will have to give her adequate analgesic and also monitor her vitals like pulse, blood pressure, temperature, and as already told, the input and output. Now the definitive treatment is the antibiotic. The antibiotic should cover your aerobes, the anaerobes. So usually what is given is gentamicin with clindamycin. We can also give amoxicillin, ampicillin or ampicillin with gentamicin and clindamycin, or we can give ceftriaxone and metronidazole, what is normally given also, or we can give piperacillin tazobactam also. In severe infections, we can go for imipenem celestin. So the most important, even if you remember this gentamicin, clindamycin also good enough. So this is the most important, it is the definitive treatment. Rarely the patient may require surgical management also. Like if there is an episiotomy wound which is infected, this requires sometimes sutures may have to be removed so that the drainage is proper and then regular dressing has to be done. Sometimes again resuturing may be required. If there is some retained product of conceptus left out in the uterine cavity, it will have to be evacuated after an antibiotic coverage. Now the porphyrial uterus is very, very soft, so it should be done after antibiotic coverage because there are chances of uterine perforation during the procedure. Again, if there is a cesarean section wound infection, this also requires dressing again and again, and accordingly, resuturing may or may not be required depending upon the depth of the wound gapping if present. Also, if there is pelvic abscess, as already told, which could be a cause of fever, this abscess may have to be drained by a posterior colpotomy incision. So, surgical treatment is not usually required, but may at times be required in cases of parpedal pyrexia. So, most importantly, the parpedal pyrexia could be because of, we have to consider it as parpedal pyrexia to be because of parpedal sepsis. The other causes are urinary tract infection could be the cause. It could be because of mastitis. It could be because of the wound infection. It could be because of some other causes. Pulmonary infection. Now we will discuss about subinvolution. Now, involution is the process by which the uterus comes back to its normal size and shape. Now, if it doesn't come back to its normal size and shape, it is called subinvolution. By the end of 2 weeks pulpidum, the uterus should become a pelvic organ. That is, it shouldn't be palpable per abdomen after 2 weeks. Now, if it has not occurred, or the regression of the uterine height has not occurred sufficiently, it is called as subinvolution. That is, the uterus is yet big enough. So, what are the causes of subinvolution? Most commonly, when there is distension of the uterus because of multiparity, because of multiple pregnancy, because of polyhydramnia, that is over-distended uterus may cause subinvolution. If she is a grand multipara, then again the chances of subinvolution increases. If her maternal nutrition is poor, is also another cause of malnutrition. Another cause, most important, very common is cesarean section. The patients who are admitted to our undergoing cesarean section, you may find subinvolution is common. So every case of subinvolution need not be treated actually, because cesarean section itself is causing subinvolution. If the subinvolution is associated with symptoms, then only we have to take care and find out the cause and treat accordingly. If there is prolapse of the uterus again, there could be subinvolution, uterine fibroid, retained product of conception, uterine sepsis. These are the most important factors which needs to be treated or taken care of. If there is retained product, there could be subinvolution. If there is infection, there could be subinvolution. Now, the patient may be asymptomatic in majority of the cases or may have symptoms like abnormal local discharge, irregular or excessive vaginal bleeding. So, discharge, bleeding are the most important things. There could be irregular cramp-like pains if there is retained product. So, there will be cramps because of retained products, or there could be fever because of sepsis. So how will you, these are the symptoms. So they may be totally asymptomatic also, and you may find a subinvoluted uterus during your clinical examination, but they may have symptoms like abnormal discharge, abnormal bleeding, or abdominal pain or fever. So during your examination, you will find the height of the uterus will be more than expected on that particular day of birth. You must be knowing the rate of involution of the uterus, so it will not occur according to the normal rate. And there will be other features for subinvolution, like there could be fever, the temperature may be high, okay, the abdominal local discharge could be seen during your examination also. So how do you manage? It will depend upon the cause. All cases of subinvolution without symptoms, without any other abnormalities do not need to be treated. But if suspect there is endometritis, you have to give antibiotics. If there is retained product, you have to evacuate it. In case of prolapse or retroversion causing subinvolution, you may have to put a pessary. Now coming to urinary problems in puerperal. Urinary problem is very, very common in puerperal. Most commonly is the retention of urine. So a patient might have delivered in the labor room, and later on you ask her to pass urine, she will not be able to pass. It is very, very common. Around 30 to 40% of the patients sometimes may complain of retention of urine, and this could be because of bruising or edema of the bladder neck, because the fetal head was pushing on the bladder neck all this while. So the bladder neck was compressed in between the pubic symphysis and the fetal head. So there could be edema causing retention. It could be because of reflex pain from the perineal injury. Because of pain, she refuses to pass urine. Or it could be because of, sometimes it is not mentioned here, is vulval hematoma. So any case of retention of urine has to be examined very thoroughly. It could be because of an hematoma which may require surgical intervention also. So in those cases, retention of urine has to be, usually when there is hematoma, it needs to be drained. Otherwise, just keeping a catheter for 48 hours is good enough along with antibiotics, antibiotic coverage. Next is the urinary tract infection. Urinary tract infection could be because of the patient might be having previously some urinary tract infection or kidney infection, previous stages of pyelitis, which could recur during the purpura. Or she might be having asymptomatic bacteriuria during the pregnancy, which becomes overt in the purpura. The infection contracted for the first time during purpura due to frequent catheterization, because we sometimes have to catheterize the bladder. So it could be because of frequent catheterization or stasis of urine due to lack of bladder tone. The organisms responsible are E. coli, Klebsiella, Proteus, Staph aureus. So in these cases, when we are suspecting UTI, the patient will be having fever, other urinary symptoms, we have to empirically start on some antibiotics, and simultaneously before starting the antibiotic, we have to send urine for routine and culture. And subsequently, empirically, we will start her on antibiotics, and subsequently, we will modify the antibiotic according to the culture report, culture and sensitivity report. Another problem that can occur in the purpura is urinary incontinence. It could be overflow incontinence. The patient might be having a full bladder but might not be aware of it. And before she becomes aware, the bladder overflows. It could be stress urinary incontinence. Stress urinary incontinence is that whenever she puts a stress on the abdomen in the form of coughing or sneezing, what happens? There, even while laughing, what happens? The urine may leak. That is called stress urinary incontinence. It is quite common in the immediate postpartum period. And then what happens? It occurs in the late postpartum period. These patients need to do pelvic floor exercise, and sometimes some medications like Duloxetine needs to be given for stress urinary incontinence. But then if it lasts for longer, it may also require surgical intervention. But many cases, postpartum cases, they come back to normal after a year, 6 months or a year, they become normal. Now, true incontinence, that is, there is leaking of urine. There is some leak of urine from somewhere. It could be because of a vesicovaginal fistula in case of obstructive liver. Now, if a fistula is detected, it need not be repaired immediately. At least 3 months time for the tissues to regain, to go back to the original state, and then we will all the edema and everything to regress, and then we will go for a repair definitive surgery for true incontinence. Now, other problems during the purpura are the breast complications. There could be breast engorgement. This is very, very common because it occurs due to exaggerated normal venous and lymphatic engorgement of the breast which precedes lactation. Now, if the mother is not feeling well, what happens? Breast engorgement usually starts from the third day. In the first and the second day, the milk production is lesser. It is only the colostrum. The milk production mainly starts from the third day, and then the breast engorgement starts. So, breast engorgement is usually not present in the first 2 days. Now, when the breast engorgement starts, she has to feed the baby frequently. If not, then the breast gets engorged. So we can prevent it by avoiding prelactal feeds. When we avoid prelactal feeds, the baby baby will be hungry, and then the baby will feed properly. So we have to avoid the prelactal feeds. Early and exclusive breastfeeding on demand. The correct position and proper attachment is very important. The patient will complain of pain and heaviness in both the breast, generalized malaise and transient fever and painful breastfeeding. So this breast engorgement may progress to mastitis, this is inflammation, and then it may even progress to breast abscess. So it is very important that it is treated and taken care of at the stage of breast engorgement itself. Proper breast support has to be given, frequent suckling has to be encouraged, manual extraction of the leftover milk after each feeds, then cold compression may be given, and analgesics for the pain. Now, acute mastitis. The common organisms are Staph aureus, Staphylococcus epidermidis, and Streptococcus viridis. The infection involving the breast parenchymal tissues may lead to cellulitis, and infection may pass through the lactiferous duct leading to development of primary memory adenitis. So this is a picture of acute mastitis. The risk factors are poor nursing, maternal fatigue and cracked nipple. This acute mastitis, the patient will present with generalized malaise, headache, nausea, vomiting, fever with chills, pain and tender swelling in one quadrant of the breast. There will be features, the toxic features will be present, okay, and the swelling would be present. The skin would be red hot, flushed, and tense and tender. On microscopic examination, leukocytes and bacterial count will be more than 10 to the power 3 per ml in the breast milk. It could lead to breast abscess. So it needs to be treated with proper antibiotics and breast support, plenty of oral fluids, hydration has to be taken care of. And the most important thing is exclusive breastfeeding. Will also prevent not only breast involvement, mastitis also. So exclusive breastfeeding with good attachment of the baby. So and additionally analgesics need to be given. Now breast abscess can develop, as I said, if the mastitis is not treated well. Here, brownie edema of the overlying skin, the breast will be tense, tender fluctuation. There will be fluctuant swelling in any of the quadrants of the breast with room temperature. So, treatment is by a radial incision usually given. Actually, incision is given this radial incision, and the abscess is drained out. Incision and drain. Anywhere abscess or pass anywhere of the body needs to be drained. Similarly, in case of breast abscess, also it has to be drained. Now, porphyral venous thrombosis. So, thrombotic disorders are very common during pregnancy because of the predisposition. The pregnancy and the porphyrium are periods of high risk for thromboembolism. It could be a septic pelvic thrombophlebitis, it could be deep vein thrombosis, or it could be a pulmonary embolus. Now, what happens is septic pelvic thrombophlebitis? The vessels, the veins in the location of the placenta, they become thrombosed, and it can extend on the right side of the patient through the ovarian veins into the inferior vena cava, and the left side through the ovarian veins into the kidney, and it can spread further also. So this is how the septic pelvic, this is from the infection in the, originally in the placental cell causing thrombosis here. The patient usually develops, or patients with septic pelvic thrombophlebitis usually develop fever in the second week of porphyria. It could be also associated with chills and rigor. Headache, malaise, tachycardia, everything could be present. And on the blood count measure, like in any kind of infection, there could be leukocytosis. Investigations. Ultrasound may help us to detect and confirm by CT scan and MRI. And these are usually treated with antibiotics and anticoagulants or heparin. Deep vein thrombosis. This is very important, though the incidence is less in our country, but in the Western countries, deep vein thrombosis incidence is very high. So these patients will have thrombus formed in the big vessels of the leg as well as the pelvis also, like the iliofemoral vessels, the femoropopliteal vessels. The patients usually present with pain in the calf muscles. And there will be edema of the leg, local rise of temperature. You can see there is edema of the leg and local rise of temperature. Now, how do you know there is deep vein thrombosis? There will be edema, pain in the leg. On examination, when you dorsiflex the foot of the patient, there will be pain. Also, another sign that is called the Moses sign. When you just press on the muscles of the calf, there will be pain. So this would indicate there is some form of thrombosis in the leg. So in those cases, you have to do one Doppler ultrasound to detect whether there is radial thrombus in the vessel or not. Then venography may have to be done, and MRI is confirmatory for the diagnosis. Management: bed rest with foot and elevation. Analgesics have to be given, appropriate antibiotics given, anticoagulants such as heparin. When deep vein thrombosis is diagnosed, heparin is the drug of choice. We can also treat with low molecular weight heparin, Fondaparinux, and warfarin. Lip physiotherapy has to be done. Inferior vena cava filters. If there are recurrent embolism, now this is a deep vein thrombosis, it may embolize to the lungs also, causing pulmonary embolism. So if there is recurrent embolism, we may have to give inferior vena cava filters, or patients who are in whom we cannot give anticoagulants. With patients with contraindications for anticoagulants, again, we may have to put an inferior vena cava filter. Sometimes fibrinolytic agents like streptokinase, if it is a pulmonary embolism, we may have to treat with fibrinolytic agents like streptokinase, or even venous thrombectomy may have to be done. Pulmonary embolism is one of the leading cause of maternal death in developing countries. So such patients of pulmonary embolism, how do they present? Immediately in the porphyria? In the porphyria, many times in the porphyria, the patient may suddenly collapse with acute chest pain and air hunger. And death, in severe cases, death may, when the great vessels, the bigger vessels are involved, there could be death within a short time from shock and vagal inhibition. On examination, tachypnea, dyspnea, pleuritic chest pain, tachycardia, hemoptysis, and fever could be present. So, such patients with pulmonary embolism may have chest pain as well as fever. So how does the pulmonary embolism forms? So from the vessels of the pelvis and the limb, this clot may dislodge. The embolus may break off and then it can travel through the veins to the lung, through the heart to the lung ultimately. The embolus travels through the heart and get lodged in the blood vessels of the lung. That is called pulmonary embolism. How do you diagnose? By chest X-ray, where the vascular markings where it has caused the embolism will be absent. ECG, arterial blood pressure analysis, D-dimer. If D-dimer has a high negative predictive value, so if it is normal, it is unlikely to be a pulmonary embolism. Doppler ultrasound, pulmonary angiography. Now, this angiography has been replaced mostly by computed tomographic pulmonary angiography, that is CTPS, CT pulmonary angiography, and magnetic resonance angiography. So this is how we diagnose a pulmonary embolism. It is an emergency and needs resuscitation with cardiac massage, oxygen, heparin bolus, and then maintenance dose, IV fluid support, maintenance of BP. Heparin has to continue for prolonged duration. If there is tachycardia, digitalis may have to be given, and definitively, like embolectomy, intravenous filters, ligation of IVC and ovarian veins may have to be done depending upon the case. Now coming to the psychiatric disorders during porphyria. It could be puerperal blues, puerperal depression, or puerperal psychosis with gradually increasing severity. Puerperal blue is very common. Around 50% of the postpartum women may suffer from puerperal blues. It is a transient state of mental illness and starts usually in the first week of delivery. There will be depression, there could be anxiety also, spells of tearfulness, there could be insomnia, helplessness, negative feeling towards the infant. On examination, there will be no metabolic or endocrinal abnormalities. It is just reassurance and psychological support that is required. Postpartum depression affects 10 to 20% of the mothers. It is more gradual in onset and usually occurs over the first 4 to 6 months following delivery or abortion. It can also occur following an abortion and is due to thalamo-pituitary adrenal axis alteration. It is manifested by loss of weight, appetite, insomnia, social withdrawal, irritability, and even suicidal attitude. So you just see there is suicidal attitude in postpartum depression, and then it's postpartum psychosis and even infanticidal attitude is also present. So treatment is by serotonin reuptake inhibitors like paroxetine or fluoxetine, reassurance and psychological support. So in cases of psychiatric disorders, we have to sought help from the psychiatric department, the doctors from psychiatry. Now postpartum psychosis, it is observed in 0.14 to 0.26% of the women. This is again an emergency and the mother may require admission. It is relatively sudden in onset within 4 days of delivery, manifested by fear, restlessness, confusion, hallucinations, delusion, disorientation. So she may sometimes have suicidal tendencies. She may also sometimes have infanticidal impulses. So hospitalization is required. Chlorpromazine 150 mg stat and 150 to 150 mg thrice daily subsequently may have to be given. Even sublingual estradiol may be given. Electroconvulsive therapy may have to be given. So this is an emergency postpartum psychosis. This could be a cause of sudden infant death also because the mother suffering from psychosis may have killed the child. So this is an emergency. This is about porphyria. So most importantly about porphyria, what you need to know is porphyral pyrexia and most importantly porphyral sepsis. Yes, breast infections are also very important, breast complications and urinary complications. Deep vein thrombosis is very common in the Western countries. It's not common here. Yes, we got few cases of deep vein thrombosis in our wards also, but it is more common in the Western countries. So your long questions may come on deep vein thrombosis also, even breast complications of porphyria. Short notes on complications of just enumerate the causes of some causes of porphyral pyrexia may be there. Okay. Long question on porphyria may be there. Porphyria is a very small chapter actually, the normal and abnormal porphyria. If you read this, it will cover not only your theory but also your practicals. Because if you get a long case, you will be dragged through all the complications during the porphyria. And if you just answer the basic important point, that is good enough. You need not go into the depth, like what is the factor V gradient deficiencies, what are the other causes of thromboembolism, those things. Even if you do not answer, like what are the causes of increased chances of thromboembolism during pregnancy, protein C deficiency, proteinase deficiency. Even if you are not able to tell those things, inherited thrombophilias, no problem. But basic things you should know: how to treat, how to manage. Okay. Any questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.